He returned home from work, expecting the same silence that had haunted his house for years. But what he saw made his heart stop. A sound he hadn't heard in 2 long years filled the air, a laughter so pure it felt like a miracle. His daughter, the little girl who had stopped speaking after tragedy, was alive with joy, but with someone he didn't know. Anger, shock, and guilt collided in an instant. And in that moment, he realized everything he thought he knew about life and love was about to change forever. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching. Daniel Carter had always believed that life was a series of achievements measured by grandeur, towering skyscrapers, sleek cars parked in pristine garages, and the hum of a private helicopter cutting across the Texas skyline. As one of Austin's most prominent real estate developers, he had built an empire that many envied. Yet despite all the wealth and accolades, a shadow loomed over his heart, a shadow shaped by loss. 2 years earlier, the vibrant light of his life, his wife Claire, had been taken suddenly. The accident was cruelly abrupt, leaving Daniel grasping at emptiness. Their daughter, Sophie, once an exuberant child whose laughter could fill the largest room, had fallen silent. Her voice seemed to have disappeared along with her mother, leaving Daniel in a silence heavier than any mansion could shelter. In those first months, Daniel had clung desperately to hope. He scoured the city for specialists, psychologists, and even child behavior experts. He took Sophie on trips to Boston, to New York, anywhere that promised healing or insight. Each visit ended the same way. Sophie's hollow eyes stared at him, silently, her little hands clinging tightly to her blanket, as if her soul had been sealed off from the world. The doctors shrugged. The therapists offered suggestions that never worked, and Daniel felt a gnawing helplessness that no amount of wealth could erase. Slowly, he began to retreat from the world that once brought him pride. The office calls continued. The meetings persisted, but Daniel no longer found joy in any of it. He buried himself in work, ignoring Sophie's silent plea for connection, numbing his grief with contracts and investments. The mansion grew colder, echoing with Sophie's quiet footsteps and the ghost of laughter that no longer existed. One crisp autumn afternoon, Daniel returned home earlier than usual, tired of boardroom discussions and unfinished deals. As he drove up the winding path toward the mansion, a strange sound reached him, a peal of laughter. It was faint, yet unmistakable. His heart lurched. He parked, his mind spinning with a mix of suspicion and hope. Daniel entered the grand house and moved toward the laundry room, where he expected only the hum of machines and Sophie's silent form sitting alone. Instead, he froze in disbelief. There, in the warm golden light streaming through the windows, was a young woman with a gentle smile, carefully balancing Sophie on her shoulders. Sophie's laughter rang out like a melody Daniel hadn't heard in years. She clutched the woman's hands, her eyes shining with delight, her little legs dangling as she squealed in joy. "Who? What is this?" Daniel's voice was tight with anger and shock. The young woman, sensing his presence, turned quickly, her hands still supporting Sophie. I'm Maya, sir," she said softly, standing up and gently lowering Sophie. "I'm the new housekeeper." Daniel's fists clenched. His mind raced with disbelief and fury. How dare anyone take liberties with his daughter without his knowledge? How could this stranger elicit the very sound he had been aching for, and in doing so claim any role in his home? "Sophie, get down," he ordered sharply, though his voice trembled. "Now!" Sophie, startled, slipped off Maya's shoulders and hid behind her, peeking out with wide, frightened eyes. "Daniel, please," Maya said, her tone calm but firm. "She wanted to be up here. She asked me to—" "I don't want to hear it." Daniel cut her off. His anger, raw and unrefined, boiled over. "Get out of my house!" Maya's expression wavered between hurt and understanding. Without another word, she gathered her belongings and left, leaving a silent, frightened Sophie behind. Daniel, breathing. Heavily stood frozen, his heart pounding, not with victory but with an unexpected ache of loss. For days, Sophie retreated further into her silence, refusing to play, refusing to eat, refusing even to speak a single word. The mansion felt emptier than ever, the walls echoing not with laughter, but with guilt. Daniel, for the first time, realized that his anger had not protected his child. It had punished her, driven away a chance at healing, and reinforced the grief he so desperately wanted to escape. It was Mrs. Harper, the long-time housekeeper who had served the family quietly for decades, who finally approached him. "Sir," she said gently one evening, "before that day, before you saw Maya," Sophie spoke for the first time in 2 years. She asked Maya to lift her up. Daniel felt the room spin around him. The realization hit like a thunderclap. He had thrown away hope in a blind fury. Maya hadn't disrupted anything. She had given Sophie a voice again, a tiny spark of life that Daniel had feared extinguished forever. His pride crumbled, replaced by shame and longing. He couldn't bear the thought of losing that spark, of leaving Sophie in the void that he himself had created. From that moment, a quiet determination settled in him. He would find Maya. He would apologize. He would make things right, not just for Sophie, but for himself. Little did Daniel know, this decision would mark the beginning of a journey that would challenge his ideas of wealth, happiness, and love. It would teach him that healing could come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the heart's most precious treasures are hidden not in mansions or bank accounts, but in the hands and hearts of those who simply care enough to lift us up. Daniel Carter could hardly sleep that night. The mansion, usually a sanctuary of control and precision, felt suffocating. Every room whispered reminders of his failure, Sophie's empty laughter, Claire's absence, and the ghostly echo of Maya's gentle presence. His mind replayed the scene over and over, the way Sophie's tiny arms had clutched Maya's hands, the way her eyes had sparkled with life after years of silence. But then came his fury, and with it the deafening silence that followed. The next morning, Sophie remained withdrawn. She sat on the plush carpet in the sunroom, knees drawn to her chest, eyes vacant. Daniel approached cautiously, his usual commanding tone softened into a tentative whisper. "Sophie, do you want breakfast?" She did not answer. She did not move. Daniel's heart twisted. For 2 years, her silence had haunted him, but now it seemed a conscious rejection, a punishment for his own mistakes. He remembered Mrs. Harper's words from the day before. The revelation about Maya's impact, and guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. Finally, he went to Mrs. Harper. She was folding linens in the laundry room, her hands precise but her eyes gentle. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice almost breaking, "tell me everything you know about Maya and—" "Sophie, I need to understand," Mrs. Harper nodded, sighing softly. "She's a rare soul, sir. Maya has a way of seeing children, not as problems to fix, but as people to love." Sophie felt safe with her, and for the first time she wanted to speak. That little spark, that laughter, it wasn't just play. It was a breakthrough. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "And I chased her away. You were scared," Mrs. Harper said gently. And so was Sophie. "But she remembers Maya, Daniel. She wants her back, even if she doesn't have the words to ask." Daniel swallowed hard, a mixture of shame and determination rising inside him. He had spent years building an empire, yet he realized he had no control over the most important thing in his life, Sophie's heart. And now he understood that strength wasn't found in wealth or status, but in humility, patience, and courage. Without a second thought, Daniel drove to the neighborhood Maya called home. It was a modest area of Austin, quiet and unassuming, a stark contrast to the marble halls and manicured gardens of his mansion. He parked his car and walked hesitantly down a narrow lane lined with small brick houses. Children played barefoot on the street, their laughter raw and unpolished, a reminder that joy could exist anywhere, unbound by luxury. Finally, he reached a small house at the end of the lane. Maya opened the door before he could knock. She looked surprised, her eyes wary, as though she had learned not to expect anything from people like him. "Daniel Carter," she said, voice steady but cautious. "What are you doing here? I came to apologize," Daniel said earnestly, "for everything. For my anger, my pride, for chasing you away. I see now that you didn't take anything from us. You gave Sophie something she'd lost, something I failed to protect. I was wrong." Maya studied him, her expression unreadable. "You have a lot of pride to swallow," she said softly. "And it took a lot of courage to come here. Why should I believe you won't hurt her again?" Daniel knelt slightly, the gesture unfamiliar and humbling. "Because I've realized that hurting her, hurting anyone I love, is the only thing I fear more than losing control. I can't fix the past, but I want to help make the future right." Maya paused, her gaze flicking toward the little garden where her younger brother and sister were playing. She could see the sincerity in Daniel's eyes, the rare openness of a man confronting not just loss, but his own failings. Finally, she spoke. "I won't promise anything permanent yet. But for Sophie, I'll go back. Just for her." Relief washed over Daniel in a wave he hadn't felt in years. He drove back to the mansion with a mixture of hope and apprehension, unsure of what awaited him, but knowing that taking responsibility was the first step toward mending their fractured family. When Maya returned, Sophie's reaction was instantaneous. She ran into Maya's arms, a shy but radiant smile breaking through her usual guardedness. Daniel watched from the doorway, tears stinging his eyes. He had waited years for this moment, yet now he realized that the real miracle was not just Sophie's laughter. It was the courage to let someone else care for her, the bravery to accept help, and the willingness to forgive. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion slowly began to breathe again. Sophie's laughter filled the halls once more, small but persistent, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She began to speak, hesitant at first, then with increasing confidence. Daniel marveled at the sight. His daughter reading aloud in the garden, telling stories to Maya as if no time had passed at all. Maya's influence extended beyond Sophie. She taught Daniel to see the beauty in ordinary moments. The soft rustle of leaves, the warmth of a shared meal, the small victories of everyday life. Under her guidance, Daniel began to reconnect not only with his daughter, but with himself. He discovered that wealth could buy many things, but love, patience, and understanding could not be purchased. They had to be nurtured, given freely and cherished. One afternoon, Daniel found himself planting roses with Sophie and Maya. Each rose represented something important: resilience, hope, and courage. Sophie laughed as dirt smeared her hands, her laughter infectious. Maya smiled at Daniel, and he realized that life's most profound lessons often came in the quietest, simplest ways. Daniel also learned about Maya's dreams. She longed to finish her university education and help her siblings build a better future. Inspired by her dedication and selflessness, Daniel began to support her financially and emotionally. He realized that giving someone else the chance to thrive was more fulfilling than any skyscraper, car, or helicopter ever could be. The mansion transformed from a cold, silent place into a home, alive with warmth, learning, and love. Daniel understood that Maya had not just saved Sophie, she had saved him. She had reminded him of the joy he had forgotten, the patience he had lost, and the love he had feared he could no longer feel. One evening, Daniel stood on the terrace, watching Sophie and Maya laughing in the garden below, their hands covered in soil, their faces glowing with joy. He whispered a quiet promise to himself: "No matter what happens, I will never let pride or anger destroy this happiness again. I will be the father and the man they need me to be." Little did he know, this was only the beginning. The lessons of forgiveness, humility, and love would ripple through the family's lives in ways that Daniel could never have imagined. And as the roses in the garden grew, so too did a new sense of hope, one that would guide Daniel, Sophie, and Maya toward a future filled with purpose, compassion, and unshakable bonds. The mansion was no longer just a symbol of wealth. It had become a sanctuary of healing, a place where broken hearts could find their rhythm again, and where laughter, once lost, could bloom like the roses in the garden. The mansion had begun to hum with life again. What had once been a hollow shell, filled with silent echoes, now vibrated with laughter, conversation, and the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. Daniel Carter watched from the grand staircase, a cup of tea in his hands as Sophie ran across the polished marble floor, her tiny hands clutching a book she had just finished reading aloud to Maya. The sound of her voice, once so fragile and timid, now carried confidence and joy. Daniel felt a lump in his throat, realizing just how far they had all come. Maya moved gracefully around the room, adjusting cushions, sharing quiet jokes with Sophie, and occasionally shooting Daniel a warm glance. The man had come to understand that Maya's presence was not a disruption, it was a gift. She had taught him slowly and gently to step out of his own grief and pride and to see the world through the eyes of those he loved. It was during one golden afternoon that Daniel first noticed how much Sophie had changed. The little girl, who had once clung to silence like a shield, now approached him with stories about her day, questions about the flowers in the garden, and the simplest declarations of joy. She had discovered an appetite for reading and learning, and Maya had been at her side every step of the way, patient, encouraging, and endlessly kind. Daniel joined them in the garden one afternoon, kneeling beside Sophie as she planted tiny rose seedlings in the freshly tilled soil. Maya handed them trowels and gloves, demonstrating the gentle care each plant required. "These are more than just flowers," she said softly. "Each one represents something important: patience, courage, love, and every time you care for them, you care for yourself and each other." Sophie nodded earnestly, pressing a seedling into the earth with her tiny fingers. "Like healing?" she asked. "Yes," Maya said with a smile. "Exactly, like healing." Daniel watched in silence, the simple lessons sinking deep into his heart. For years, he had chased accomplishments, awards, and accolades, believing they defined his worth. Now, kneeling in the dirt with his daughter and watching her laugh, he understood that the truest measure of life was the love we gave and received, the bonds we nurtured, and the joy we shared. The days that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and growth. Sophie's laughter echoed through every room, blending seamlessly with the soft sounds of music that Maya introduced. They sang together, read stories aloud, and created little rituals that anchored their lives: morning walks in the garden, evening tea by the fireplace, and weekly trips to the local library. Daniel, who had once measured life in contracts and deals, now measured it in moments: the smile on Sophie's face, the laughter shared over a spilled cup of tea, the quiet pride in Maya's eyes as Sophie read her first story aloud without hesitation. Daniel also began to recognize the depth of Maya's dreams and sacrifices. She had put aside her own education and aspirations to care for her younger siblings and take the job in his mansion. He realized that wealth and influence had allowed him to act on his desires freely, yet Maya, despite having so little, gave everything she could to nurture another's life. Her humility, dedication, and courage inspired Daniel to reimagine the meaning of success, not as a collection of possessions, but as the ability to make a difference in someone else's world. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Daniel and Maya sat together in the study, sipping tea in comfortable silence. He finally spoke, his voice soft and reflective. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said. "About Claire, about Sophie, and about you. I realized that I spent so long chasing the wrong things. I forgot what really matters, and now I see how much you've given us, how much you've given me." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both warmth and modesty. "I didn't do it to be thanked, Daniel. I did it because Sophie needed someone to believe in her, and you needed someone to remind you that life isn't over, even when it feels broken." Daniel felt a swell of gratitude that went deeper than words. He had come to understand that Maya's presence was not just about healing Sophie, it was about healing him too. He had been trapped in grief, pride, and fear, unable to accept help or love. And yet, through her patience and kindness, he had been shown a new way of being, one that embraced vulnerability, connection, and joy. The transformation in their home extended beyond the walls of the mansion. Daniel began supporting Maya in her pursuit of education, arranging for tutors, funding her courses, and offering encouragement whenever doubts arose. He realized that true wealth was not measured by property or money, but by the lives one touched and the potential one nurtured. Maya, in turn, shared her knowledge and compassion with Sophie, teaching her lessons that no textbook ever could, lessons in empathy, courage, and resilience. As the months passed, the garden became their sanctuary, a place where memories were honored and new beginnings flourished. Sophie planted roses of every color, each representing a virtue: hope in soft pink, courage in deep red, and love in golden yellow. Daniel often helped, though he was more awkward with a trowel than either of the women. But in those moments of shared labor and laughter, he felt a profound sense of belonging he had not known in years. One particularly quiet afternoon, Daniel noticed Sophie pausing by a small rosebush, her hands cupping a delicate bloom. She turned to Maya and Daniel, her eyes shining. "This one is special," she whispered. "It's for Mommy." Daniel felt a pang in his chest, a mixture of longing and tenderness. Claire's memory remained a guiding presence, woven into the laughter, the lessons, and even the rose garden they had cultivated together. Maya gently placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that grief could coexist with joy, that the past did not have to overshadow the present. In the warmth of that moment, Daniel realized that life's true magic lay not in what we accumulate, but in the courage to open our hearts, to forgive, and to embrace love in its many forms. He had once believed that losing Claire meant losing everything, but he now understood that life had offered him a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to nurture and to cherish. By the time winter arrived, the mansion had become a haven of growth and transformation. Sophie's voice rang out clearly, her laughter resonating through halls that once knew only silence. Maya's presence had infused the home with warmth, patience, and light. And Daniel, who had once been a man consumed by work and sorrow, had rediscovered a sense of purpose, a capacity for love, and a joy that came from giving rather than receiving. Together, the three of them had learned that healing was not a singular act, but a continuous journey. Every shared meal, every story read aloud, every flower planted in the garden was a step toward wholeness. And as Daniel watched Sophie run through the rose beds, calling out the names she had given each bloom, he realized that their lives had been transformed not by wealth or influence, but by the quiet, steady power of love, trust, and dedication. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation and sorrow, had become a living testament to resilience. Through Maya's unwavering compassion, Sophie had found her voice again. Through Sophie's laughter and curiosity, Daniel had found his own. And through the simple act of caring for one another, they had created something far more valuable than any empire, a home filled with hope, love, and the unshakable belief that even the deepest wounds could bloom into something beautiful. Years had passed, and the once silent mansion had transformed into a haven of laughter, learning, and love. The echoes of grief had softened into memories that carried warmth rather than pain. Daniel Carter, now a man tempered by both loss and love, walked through the sunlit halls with a quiet pride. Sophie, no longer the timid, withdrawn child she had once been, moved around with a confidence that radiated joy. And Maya, whose presence had once been a source of hope and renewal, had become an inseparable part of their lives, an anchor of patience, wisdom, and unwavering care. The garden, their sanctuary, had grown into a vivid tapestry of colors. Roses bloomed in every hue, each carefully planted and tended by Sophie over the years. There were roses for courage, roses for hope, roses for love, and many more, each carrying the lessons she had learned through her journey. 2 special roses stood side by side in the center of the garden, one for Claire, Daniel's late wife, whose memory remained an enduring presence, and one for Maya, whose guidance had rekindled the light in both father and daughter. It was a crisp spring morning when Daniel stood at the edge of the garden, watching Sophie lead a group of children from underprivileged families through the rows of roses. Her voice was clear, confident, and filled with a gentle authority. "This rose is hope," she said, pointing to a soft pink bloom. "It reminds us that even after the darkest times, there's always a chance for a new beginning." Daniel's heart swelled as he observed the children's faces lighting up with curiosity and wonder. He saw in them the same spark he had feared lost in Sophie for so long. Maya stood nearby, smiling quietly, her eyes reflecting pride and humility. She had guided Sophie not only to speak again, but to embrace a life of compassion, learning, and service to others. In the quiet of that morning, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He remembered the first day Maya had walked into the mansion, the anger that had flared in him and the silence that had followed her departure. He remembered the guilt that had driven him to find her, the humility it had taken to apologize, and the courage it had required to open his heart once more. Every trial, every misstep, every moment of doubt had led them to this day, a day where healing had blossomed into purpose. Daniel had also grown through the experience. He had founded a foundation dedicated to helping children from underprivileged families access education, mentorship, and opportunities to thrive. Maya had continued her studies, earning her degree, and eventually taking a leadership role in the foundation, guiding its programs with the same dedication and care she had shown Sophie. Daniel's work in real estate continued, but it had taken on new meaning. Profits were now a means to give back, to empower, and to create lasting impact beyond the confines of wealth and property. As Sophie guided the children through the garden, she paused by the two special roses. "This one is for Mommy," she said softly, touching the delicate petals of the rose dedicated to Claire. "She taught us love." She then turned to the rose named for Maya. "And this one is for Maya," she said, her voice full of warmth. "She taught us how to live again." Daniel stood behind them, tears brimming in his eyes. He realized that life had a way of circling back, of teaching lessons when one was ready to learn. The laughter of children, the pride in Sophie's voice, and Maya's quiet guidance had combined to create something far more meaningful than wealth, status, or control. They had cultivated love, resilience, and hope, qualities that could not be bought, only nurtured. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel sat on the terrace with Maya, watching Sophie laugh with the children in the fading light. The mansion glowed with warmth, the rooms filled with the quiet hum of contentment. He reached out and took Maya's hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of years of gratitude, respect, and admiration. "You've given us everything," Daniel said softly. "Sophie has her voice back, I've found peace, and our home has life again because of you." Maya shook her head, smiling gently. "I didn't do it alone, Daniel. You loved her, even when it was hard to show. Sophie wanted to heal, and you finally let her. I just helped guide the way." Daniel nodded, understanding that the true power of love lay not in dominance or control, but in patience, humility, and collaboration. Together, they had turned pain into purpose, silence into song, and grief into growth. Years continued to pass, and the foundation flourished. Sophie grew into a compassionate young woman, devoted to helping others find their voice and courage. Maya's influence extended beyond their home and garden, touching countless lives through education and mentorship. And Daniel, once a man defined by loss and pride, became a figure of hope and inspiration, using his resources to create lasting change. The mansion and garden remained their sanctuary, a place where memories of Claire were honored, where Sophie's laughter rang free, and where the lessons of love, forgiveness, and resilience were cultivated daily. Each rose told a story of healing, of courage, and of the transformative power of human connection. On quiet nights, Daniel would walk through the garden alone, pausing by the two special roses. He would run his fingers over the petals and whisper a silent thank you to Claire, for showing him the depth of love, to Maya for teaching him the value of hope, and to Sophie for reminding him that life, no matter how broken, could bloom again. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation and sorrow, had become a beacon of inspiration. It was a testament to the truth that wealth and status could not replace the essential elements of a meaningful life: love, compassion, and the courage to open one's heart. Through the laughter of a once silent child, the guidance of a selfless woman, and the willingness to forgive and grow, Daniel, Sophie, and Maya had created a legacy that would endure far beyond bricks, mortar, and money. As the final rays of the sun bathed the rose garden in golden light, Sophie turned to Daniel and Maya. "Look at all these roses," she said, her eyes shining. "Each one tells a story, and we get to keep writing ours." Daniel smiled, feeling a profound peace settle over him. "Yes," he whispered. "And it's a story of hope, love, and life renewed." In that moment, standing amidst roses named for virtues, memories, and the extraordinary people who had shaped their lives, Daniel realized the ultimate truth. The heart's capacity to heal, to forgive, and to love was limitless. And when nurtured, it could transform not just one life, but an entire world.